The email came on a Tuesday morning from the program director, asking if I would be willing to speak at their annual industry event. They had been following my work, said my perspective would be valuable to the current cohort. I read it twice. Then I looked at the name of the program, the one I had spent 2 years preparing to enter, the one that had rejected me, the one that had accepted my brother instead. I sat with it for a moment. Then I replied, said I would be glad to, gave nothing away in the tone, just a professional acceptance of a professional invitation. I arrived on the day of the event and was shown to the green room. The program director greeted me warmly, mentioned how much my career had developed since the years when I would have been a student here, said it with genuine enthusiasm, without any apparent awareness of the history. I thanked him, walked to the stage when my name was called, and gave a talk I had prepared. Ryan was in the 4th row. I noticed him when I reached the podium. He noticed me at the same moment. I held his gaze for just a second. Then I looked at the rest of the room and began. But to understand what that room felt like, you need to know what the 2 years before the rejection had cost. The program was one of those institutions that carries a specific weight in its field. Not the largest, not the most well-funded, but the one whose graduates tend to appear in the right places, whose network has a particular density, whose reputation among practitioners means that the name on your CV opens conversations that other names don't. I had known I wanted to apply since my 2nd year of undergraduate study, not from external pressure, from genuine interest in what the program offered, the specific combination of theory and practice, the faculty whose work I had been reading and engaging with, the alumni whose careers had taken shapes that aligned with what I was trying to build. It felt like the right place for the next stage. I treated the application accordingly. 2 years of deliberate preparation, not 2 years of nothing else. 2 years of building the specific things the application required. The portfolio, each piece chosen and developed with the selection criteria in mind. Not just doing good work, doing work that demonstrated the particular kind of thinking the program valued. The personal statement, draft after draft, each one refined through the specific process of writing something important. The process of saying something true about yourself and your work in a form that communicates clearly to people who will read hundreds of similar attempts. The references, relationships built with people whose perspective on my work would be credible to the selection panel, not collected, built through genuine engagement with people I respected and who had come to know my work well enough to speak specifically about it. The contacts. I had identified 2 alumni from the program who were working in areas adjacent to my interests, had reached out professionally, had conversations that were genuinely useful, that gave me a clearer picture of the program from the inside, and that I had hoped would provide some additional context for my application. None of that is remarkable. Many serious applicants do versions of the same thing. What made it significant in retrospect is that I shared all of it with Ryan. Every piece of it, the portfolio strategy, the personal statement in its various drafts, the names of the contacts, the specific framing I had developed for how my work and interests aligned with the program's priorities. All of it, not reluctantly, not with any caveat, openly and generously, because Ryan was my brother, 3 years younger, who had developed similar interests through a similar path, who had decided he wanted to apply to the same program in the same cycle. I had thought about whether that was wise, whether we should apply in different cycles to avoid the complication. Ryan had argued against it, said there was no reason to delay his application for the sake of an administrative convenience, that the program admitted multiple students per cycle, that both of us being strong candidates could only help. I had accepted that reasoning because it was not obviously wrong, and because the alternative implied a suspicion I didn't want to have about my brother. I helped him, actively, read his drafts, gave him specific feedback, introduced him to the contacts I had developed, shared the framing I had constructed for my own application, shared the specific language I had found useful for describing the kind of work I did and why the program was the right fit for it. I want to be clear about something. Ryan was talented, genuinely. His work was good. He had real capability. None of what happened subsequently required him to be without merit. It just required him to have used something that wasn't his, in a way that produced an outcome neither of us had explicitly discussed as a possibility. The applications went in. We waited. The letters came on the same day. His said yes. Mine said no. I read my letter first. Then I read it again. The language of rejection is always careful, designed to close a door without unnecessary damage to the person on the other side. Competitive process, strong field of applicants, does not reflect the quality of the work. Encouraged to consider reapplying. I had read similar language in other contexts, had always understood it as the necessary formality of an institution managing a large number of disappointed people. This time it landed differently, because this time I knew exactly what I had submitted, how carefully it had been prepared, how specifically it had been tailored, how clearly it represented 2 years of deliberate work directed at exactly this outcome. I put the letter down, sat with it for a while. Then Ryan called. I knew before I answered. The timing of the call, the specific hour. Both our letters would have arrived at similar times. He wouldn't have called if it had said the same thing mine had said. He said he had gotten in. There was a quality in his voice I want to describe accurately. Not pure elation. Something more complicated than that. The specific mixture of genuine happiness and something underneath it that was not quite comfortable with the happiness. I congratulated him, said I was glad for him, said it because I understood that the correct response in that moment was to say it, and because some part of it was true. He was my brother. His success was genuinely not something I wanted to be absent. I told him my letter had said no. He said he was sorry, said it quickly, with the speed of someone who had been preparing to say it, and who wanted to say it before the conversation could develop in a direction that required more than that. I said it was fine, that these things happened, that I would figure out the next step. We kept the call brief, both of us navigating the particular awkwardness of a moment that required performance of feelings neither of us could fully inhabit. I spent the next several days in a private process of working through what had happened, not the rejection itself. That was painful, but understandable. Competitive processes produce rejections. Strong applicants get rejected. It happens. What I was working through was the other part, the part that I hadn't fully articulated even to myself in the first days. The specific suspicion that had begun forming as I thought about what Ryan had submitted, and how similar the strategic foundation of his application would have been to mine, given that I had given him the strategic foundation of mine. I did not have access to his application, could not verify what he had submitted, but I knew what I had shared with him, the framing, the language, the context, the specific approach to the personal statement that I had developed across a dozen drafts. And I knew Ryan, knew how he worked, knew the specific way he incorporated information he received, the way that people who are talented but who take the path of least resistance sometimes produce work that draws more heavily on available material than their own independent thinking. I thought about his drafts, the ones I had read and given feedback on, the specific evolution of them across the weeks of preparation, the way the later drafts had moved towards something that felt increasingly familiar in a way I hadn't examined at the time, because examining it would have required a suspicion I had been actively resisting. I examined it now, and what I found when I examined it was not comfortable. The similarity was not coincidental. It was structural. The bones of his application had been built on the bones of mine, not copied, not submitted identically, modified enough to be his, but shaped by something he hadn't generated independently. I sat with that understanding for a long time, not with explosive anger, with the specific heaviness of someone who has understood something they would have preferred not to understand, about a person they had trusted completely, about what that trust had been used for. I didn't confront Ryan. Not then. Not for a long time. Because confronting him would have required a conversation I didn't know how to have. And because I understood that having it would produce one of two things. denial, or an acknowledgement that wouldn't change anything that had happened. The rejection was the rejection. The acceptance was the acceptance. Neither of those would be altered by the conversation. So I put it down and started thinking about what came next. What came next was not a second application. I considered it. The rejection letter had invited reapplication, and the work I had done was strong enough that another attempt was not unreasonable. But I spent several weeks honestly examining whether the program was still the right direction, not as a rationalization of the rejection, as a genuine reassessment. Because rejection forces a kind of clarity that acceptance doesn't always produce. When you don't get the thing you were aiming for, you are required to look at the thing more honestly, without the particular distortion that wanting something creates. And what I found when I looked at the program, honestly, was something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see while I was working toward it. The program was excellent within a specific definition of excellent. Its graduates went into specific kinds of careers, followed specific trajectories, built specific kinds of profiles. All of it genuinely good, but narrower than I had understood it to be, because I had been looking at it through the lens of wanting to be there, which had made it appear larger than its actual scope. The rejection had removed that lens, and what I saw without it was a path, a well-defined path, with clear steps and known outcomes, occupied by people who had followed it before and would follow it after. Not without value, but also not the only path, and not necessarily the best path for what I was actually trying to build. I started looking at alternatives, not as consolation, as genuine exploration. What else existed? What other routes led to the places I was interested in reaching? What I found surprised me, not because the alternatives were dramatically better, because they were more open, less structured, less defined by an institutional template, more dependent on the individual making decisions rather than following a curriculum that had been designed for outcomes someone else had chosen. I chose the alternative, not defiantly, thoughtfully, with the specific intentionality of someone who has looked at the options honestly and made a considered choice. I enrolled in a different program, less prestigious by conventional measure, but with a faculty member whose specific area of work aligned more directly with what I was developing, who became a genuine mentor rather than a famous name on a letterhead, whose influence on my thinking over the following years was more significant than any institutional credential would have been. I built differently than I would have built inside the prestigious program, more independently, more at the edges of the established field, in the space where the known methods met the problems they hadn't yet adequately addressed. That space was where my particular thinking worked best, and I might never have found it if the program had let me in, because the program's version of excellence was well-mapped. And well-mapped territory rarely requires the kind of original navigation that produces genuinely new things. The work I did in the years after the rejection was the best work of my career, not despite the rejection, partly because of what the rejection had made necessary. The specific turn away from the established path, towards something that required more of me precisely because it was less defined. Ryan completed the program, graduated with the credential, entered the career path the program prepared people for. His early years were solid. The program's network had opened doors. The credential had produced the conversations it was supposed to produce. But something in what he built had a quality I noticed from a distance. Not bad work. Work that stayed within the parameters. That demonstrated competence without generating the particular kind of attention that comes from doing something that surprises people. The work of someone who had the right training and was applying it correctly, without the specific energy that comes from having genuinely found your own direction rather than following one that was handed to you. I noticed it, said nothing, continued building my own thing, slowly, consistently, in a way that work built from genuine direction tends to build. By the time the program's email arrived, I had been recognized in the field in ways that Ryan had not been recognized in the years since his graduation. Not famous, known, in the specific, meaningful way of someone whose work has produced real things that people in the field were aware of and engaged with. The email from the program director asked if I would speak at their annual event. I read it at my desk on a Tuesday morning and understood immediately what the afternoon it described was going to contain. I prepared the talk carefully, not because I was nervous, because it deserved careful preparation. The program was asking me to speak to their current cohort, people at the beginning of something, who would take something from the afternoon into the years ahead. That responsibility deserved the same rigor I brought to any significant professional commitment. I thought about what I actually wanted to say, not what would be impressive, not what would land well in the room, what was genuinely true and worth saying to a group of people at that particular stage. The talk I developed was about the relationship between the path you plan and the path you actually build, about the specific value of the detour, the rejection, the redirection, the moment when the thing you were aiming for doesn't materialize and you are required to find something else, and how that something else is sometimes the thing that produces the work you would not have found on the easier route. I did not make it autobiographical in any explicit sense, did not reference my own application to this program, did not mention Ryan, did not tell the story I am telling now. I spoke in the general terms of a professional reflecting on how careers actually develop versus how people at the beginning of them tend to imagine they will develop. The talk was honest and genuinely useful. I believed that about it before I gave it. The morning of the event, I arrived early. The program director was warm in the way that institutional hosts are warm when they have genuine respect for the person they have invited. He spoke about my work specifically, had clearly read things I had produced, was engaging with the actual content rather than the credential, which I appreciated. The green room had the particular quality of a space used for preparation before performance. Other speakers that day, a few faculty members, the specific professional cordiality of people who don't know each other while gathering around shared occasion. I was shown to my seat in the front area when the program began. From there, I could see the audience clearly. The current cohort, faculty, alumni who had returned for the day. I scanned the room in the way you scan rooms when you are waiting for your moment, and found Ryan in the fourth row. He was looking toward the stage when I found him, not at me, at the speaker before me. I watched him for a moment. He had the particular quality of someone who has built a solid career, who is present at an event like this with the comfort of the credentialed, who belongs here in the institutional sense, who has followed the path the program designed and occupied the position that path leads to. Not unsuccessful, not where he had perhaps imagined he would be when the acceptance letter arrived, somewhere in the middle of a well-defined trajectory, doing what the program had prepared him to do. I thought about the 2 years of preparation, the personal statement drafts, the contacts I had built and shared, the specific framing I had given him along with everything else. I thought about the call on the day the letters arrived, his voice, the specific quality of the happiness that had something underneath it. I held all of that for a moment. Then I let it go, not as a performance, not because I had practiced letting it go, because the specific form the preceding years had taken had made the letting go possible. I had built something genuinely mine, had found a direction that produced work I was proud of, had arrived at this room not as a student who had been accepted, not as an alumni who had graduated, as an outside voice that the program had sought out, because of what I had built on the path that the rejection had made necessary. That was not a small thing, and the weight of it made the other things smaller. Not nothing, smaller. My name was called. I walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, looked out at the room, found Ryan in the fourth row. His eyes met mine in the moment I found him. I held it for 1 second, calm, without anything visible in my expression beyond the ordinary composure of someone about to begin. Then I looked at the rest of the room and began. The talk lasted 40 minutes. I had prepared for 35. The extra 5 arrived naturally. The way time extends when a room is genuinely engaged with what is being said, when the attention is real rather than polite. I had been in enough rooms to know the difference. This room was genuinely engaged. The current cohort in particular. The particular quality of people at the beginning of something, recognizing something true about what they are entering. Something that confirms a feeling they have had, but haven't had the language for yet. I spoke about the pressure of the correct path. The institutional gravity that pulls people toward the well-defined option. The credential. The program. The career trajectory that has been walked before and whose steps are clearly marked. I said that gravity was not wrong, that it exists for good reasons, that the well-worn path is well-worn because it leads somewhere real, but that it also has a specific cost that nobody talks about much at the beginning. The cost of not finding out what you would have built if you had been required to navigate without the map. I said the detour is undervalued. The rejection, the reapplication that doesn't happen. The pivot towards something less defined. Not because difficulty is good, but because the specific kind of thinking that finds its own direction in the absence of a clear path is the thinking that produces the most interesting work. I didn't say where I had learned that. I just said I had learned it. The room stayed with me throughout. No phones visible. The specific forward lean of people who are listening rather than waiting for their turn to think about something else. I watched the room during the talk the way I always watch a room when I am in it. Not performing the watching, just aware. The faculty engagement. The cohort's responses to specific points. The alumni in the seats around Ryan. Ryan himself, whose expression across 40 minutes I want to describe as accurately as I can. He listened. That is the honest account. He listened to the whole talk, without visible discomfort for most of it, without any expression that suggested he was managing something in particular. Just a person in a room listening to a speaker. Until the point in the talk where I spoke about the people who help you build the thing you are preparing, who give you feedback on your drafts, who share their thinking with you, because that is what people who trust each other do, and what it means to honor that generosity. I did not look at him when I said it. I was looking at the full room, delivering a point in the general register I had been using throughout. But I felt the specific quality of the moment. The way certain sentences land differently in a room depending on who is in it. I did not linger on it. Moved to the next point. Continued the talk. Concluded with something about the relationship between where you expected to end up and where you actually arrived. About the specific satisfaction of looking back at a path that didn't go where you planned, and understanding that where it went instead was the right place. The room applauded, genuinely, not the polite applause that concludes an obligation, the kind that starts before the speaker has fully finished, that has a specific energy. The program director shook my hand at the podium, said it was exactly what the cohort needed to hear. That the perspective was one the program tried to offer, but that carries more weight from someone who had built what I had built outside the institutional framework. I thanked him, returned to my seat, and the afternoon continued. I did not approach Ryan during the break, did not seek him out. He did not approach me. We existed in the same space for the remainder of the event, both of us aware of the other's presence, neither of us closing the distance, which was the appropriate shape of things. There was nothing that needed to be said. The afternoon had already said what needed to be said, in the only language that actually means anything, the language of work, and what the work had produced. The program director found me after the event, not immediately, after the room had thinned, after the current cohort had dispersed into their conversations. After the particular energy of a well-received talk had settled into the quieter atmosphere of an afternoon concluding, he asked if I had a few minutes. We sat in one of the smaller rooms off the main hall. He said he had been thinking about something during the talk, that the program had been developing an advisory structure, a small group of practitioners from outside the institution, whose perspective would inform how the curriculum developed, how the program positioned itself relative to where the field was actually going, rather than where it had been when the curriculum was last significantly updated. He said my talk had confirmed a sense he had been developing, that the kind of work I had built represented a direction the the program needed to understand better. Then my specific experience of developing something outside the institutional framework gave me a perspective that the faculty inside it couldn't easily provide. He asked if I would be willing to consider a formal advisory role, not time-intensive, 2 or 3 engagements a year, involvement in curriculum discussions, the specific kind of input that outside practitioners provide when an institution is trying to stay connected to the field as it actually develops. I listened to the offer, thought about it while he was still speaking, not calculating, genuinely considering whether the role was something I wanted, whether it served any purpose I cared about, whether being formally connected to this institution was something that added to what I was building, or whether the history attached to it made it something I should decline. I thought about the history honestly, not sentimentally. The rejection had been real. What Ryan had done had been real. The years of building something without this credential had been real. None of that disappeared because a program director was now asking me to advise them. But none of it was a reason to decline something genuinely worth doing. The program mattered. It produced real practitioners, shaped real careers, had influence over the direction of the field in ways that an advisory presence could contribute to. That contribution was worth making, regardless of the history, regardless of what the room contained that afternoon. I said yes. The director seemed genuinely pleased, talked about the other advisors who would be part of the group, names I knew, work I respected, a context I was comfortable joining. We shook hands. I left the building, stood outside for a moment, the same building I had once hoped to enter as a student, that had sent me a letter telling me the answer was no, that had just asked me to help shape what it would become. The symmetry of it was not lost on me, but I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt standing there, because the easy version of this moment is triumphant. The rejected applicant returning as an advisor. The person who was told no now being asked for something more significant than what he was originally denied. That version is available. It has a clean, satisfying shape, and is not entirely wrong. There is something in the symmetry that carries a kind of quiet satisfaction, the specific satisfaction of someone who built something real and is now being recognized for what they built, rather than for having passed through the right institution at the right time. But what I felt most standing outside that building was something quieter, something that had less to do with the program or the advisory role or anything that had happened that afternoon, and more to do with the years between the rejection and that afternoon, the specific accumulation of the work, the decision to take a different path because the path I had planned was no longer available, the faculty member who became a real mentor, the space at the edges of the field where I had found the problems worth working on, the work those years had produced. None of that had been in the plan. All of it had been better than the plan, and the program had not given me any of it. The rejection had, which is the specific irony that I want to name clearly, because I think it is worth naming. The thing that felt like the worst outcome had produced the best one. Not because difficulty is good, because the particular path the difficulty made necessary was the right path for the kind of thinking I was capable of. And I never would have found it if the easier route had been open. I drove home, called my mother that evening, told her about the advisory role. She said she was proud of me, said it with the warmth that specific phrase carries when it comes from someone who has watched the whole arc, not just the good parts, the years when the arc wasn't clear yet, when the rejection was recent and the path forward was not. I thanked her. We talked about ordinary things. The call was short. Ryan came up once, briefly. She mentioned he had been at the event, that she had heard from him, that he had said the talk was good. I said I was glad, and I meant it simply, without complication, without the satisfaction of a score being settled. Just the clean, simple gladness that someone found value in something you work hard on, regardless of who that someone was. We moved on. My relationship with Ryan is the last thing I want to describe. Not dramatically. We are brothers. We maintain that relationship in the particular way that adult siblings maintain relationships that have history in them. with the care that comes from knowing someone completely, and the distance that comes from having understood something about them that changes the simplicity of the closeness. We are in contact. We see each other at family occasions. We are civil, sometimes warm, in the specific way that warmth is possible between people who have done something that cannot be undone, and who have both chosen to continue existing in each other's lives without requiring the other to account for what happened. I have never raised it directly with him, not because I don't know, because the conversation has nothing left to offer either of us. What happened is known to both of us. The acknowledgement lives in the fact of knowing, not in the saying. And the years since have produced something more meaningful than the acknowledgement ever would have. A career built entirely on its own foundations. An advisory role at the program that once rejected me. A body of work that speaks for itself. In the only language that actually means anything. The path that closes on you isn't always the one that was right for you. Sometimes the closed door is the beginning of the direction that actually fits. If this story resonated with you, the detour that became the direction, the work that speaks when the moment finally arrives, leave it in the comments. I read every one, and the next story is already waiting for you.